listeners, Harika here, and I'm super excited to welcome you to Upptalk. If you're ready to learn and get your hands work wonders in the world of information technology, then you're in the right place. When I say Upptalk, we are not just another edtech company. Consider we are your learning partner committed to unlocking your full potential. Whether you're stepping into the world of technology for the first time or looking to advance your career, we provide top-tier, hands-on courses to build up your career. Let's take our first step towards learning here and explore it.
I'm going to continue. First reports of a backup and restore first. Then I will start doing that disaster recovery. This also is important. We require backup. The backup and restore also is important. By this end of the session, we will be able to learn backup and restore solution and test the procedure of backup and restore. There is one replicator application. That is the backup. The policy requires integration with the enterprise backup. The policy requires granular point and time to data, and policy requires objective level data production here. Whatever the data, for example, in this case, you can see that saves data. For all the saves data which we need to save into the replicator page. The saves in the vault are stored in the data and subfolder. This is the default we used to get. I will show you that. This is the data. These are the default saves and our saves. This is the save which we created. This is the operating system. All these data which we need to save, we need to keep it as a backup. This is the data, all these data. In this data, we can see the psmlib sessions. We can see the password manager details. We can see the recordings, notifications, sessions. Session recordings of the PSM. Everything it will be saved into here. All the vault internal saved. Vault internal. What is there here? These are the LDAP configuration file, and we can see this. This is the LDAP encrypted one. It needs to be saved. It needs to be as a backup. We need to be saved as a backup. This is the file it is showing here. The saves in the vault are stored in the data on subdirectory. The information about users' network area saves logs, records, and all the activities that occur between them stored in the database. This data we used to call metadata. These metadata folders are extremely important, and it is imperative to backup for regularly on daily basis. It is required to backup on that. The CyberArk vault enables you the backup operations. CyberArk will not recommend direct backup. CyberArk will always recommend direct backup. Direct backup means third-party software which needs to be installed on the vault. The application has access to the backup folder. This introduces an external application to the vault and potentially reduces the levels. But indirect backup, which we will download one in private or replicate utility. It is installed on another server on the network. Typically server hosting, another CyberArk PAM component. This component, this utility, we will install into the different server and we will configure this. Then it will replicate the data. All the metadata will be replicated here. Maybe while going to the interview, they will ask, what is the backup? How you are following the backup procedure? How you are doing the backup saving? We have to say that private or replicate utility which we need to install in another server on the network. For that, once we install and we need to configure that. Replicate utility pulls vaulted data and encrypted files. That's what I saw. You write here. This is the data. If you open this, this is an encrypted files on the server, and enterprise backup software can back up these files. We will be focusing on backing up using the private or replicate utility. The main how to install the replicate utility and perform the replication, perform the restore and set up the schedule replication. And schedule setup also, it will be the option is there. And by using, for example, if you want to do daily basis, if you want to do weekly basis or monthly basis, we have to do it before we are installing the replicate utility. The replicated utility makes sure that backup server has the following features and ability, at least the same disk space as the vault, and databases on NTFS volume and accessibility by your enterprise backup system, and physical security that only permits authorized users to access it. It will not allow for all the users, only limited persons, which will allow access for that. And before installing, we need to enable one user in that private or client that I will show you here. These steps always remember, guys, where we need to see this backup user and where we need to enable that. Here you can see the tools. Under the tools, there is administrator tool, users and groups. Here go to down in the system. In the system, we have in a backup user. These guys will have an access for the backup for all the shapes. Just update here. Earlier, this is the disabled user. Now you can enable it. Enabled it. That is what it was mentioned here. Before installing, we need to enable the backup user, and then we need to set up the password. Once you keep the backup for the same, then our data will be saved. Before we installing that, we need to enable the backup user. How we have to do here? Just go to this. Users and groups, and in the system we have a backup user. Click it and update. Disable. Go to authentication. Change the password. Give the one password. Now I am giving default password. Always give the default password. That too. This password will never expire. Update. Now I have updated and I disabled it. Then once you enable this user, we have to install the replicate utility. Once you enable this, and we can click the never expect because this password should not be rotated. These are the default. Users should not be rotated and this should be never expire on. Install the utility. There is a replicated this application which we need to just like how we are installing the component, right component of the other components like that. The same way we have to install it. But in the lab, we don't have this replicated utility software to install it. We need to get for this. I think they are not allowing for this. There is some resistance in the lab. In the organization, we will get directly. This is nothing. Just run it. Click as an administrator and click go to the setup file and run it. CyberArk replicator setup. We can start it. Nothing will give, just only for the folder which we need to update it. And that's it. Once you completed the replicated utility, we need to go for the configuration files and open that. Edit the Volini file to give the replicated utility network. Why we are giving this information here? We need to communicate the replicated utility. Communication should be happen, right? How it will happen? Through word to the port. Internal port, which we need to give, and the vault IP address. Demo vault IP address we need to give here, that it will automatically replicate to the vault or replicate to the safes and vault. These are the mandatory files. These are the mandatory Volini file. These are the configuration files. In that, once you complete it, once you install that replicated utility, we need to configure vault IP address and port of it, that it will. By using that IP address, it will communicate. Port number, it will communicate. It will connect. Then after create CRED file. And we need to create the CRED file. A CRED file user by the utility to authenticate to the vault. How we can? By using the backup credentials. We can backup. User is responsible to authenticate to the vault and get the data from the vault and save into the replicator. Always, guys. Whatever the components we are installing, there are some backup users, default users, those guys. The credentials to authenticate to vault and get the data from the vault. For example, if you take this Papua backend, there are the two users, app user and gateway user. Those two guys are responsible to get the data from the vault. PPY gateway user is responsible to fetch the credentials from the vault, and it will connect to the PPY and other components. The same way PSO default users. Those are the responsible. Or there is one DR service, DR can. DR user will create credentials and it will connect to the DR service. And it will start the replication from the primary vault to the DR vault. That I will explain you now. After this class, backup user is responsible to authenticate to vault. Because we have created credentials here, backup user is responsible. He is there in the vault. And we have updated the credentials and we have enabled this. He is responsible to authenticate it. The password of backup user is changed in the vault and CRD file is updated by the utility at every successful login. Whenever you are changing the backup user password, we need to update the CRD file in the replication utility. Test backup and restore. How it will work? This is the command. We can execute from the command prompt. The backup is launched at the command line using the replicate x executable file. You can use that. And per restore commands, and I will use to restore the saves that have previously been backed up. The only users with the restore all the saves authorization in the vault can restore your saves. And that too, this whoever accesses having the saves authorization. They restore all the saves. If you see, he is having access for backup for all the saves, whoever is having these rights. Whoever having this authorization, those guys can able to retrieve the data. Those users, only those users, to get the data. To restore, they can restore your save. To restore, or we can get the data from that. This should be have an access authorization level also is required. set up the schedule backups, and there is a some schedule and task schedule. And the scheduled task can be created and launched to launch the backups at predetermined intervals. You can create it like that. Also, we can schedule. For example, if you want to, we can set up it. For example, daily Cyber World daily backup. We can keep it as daily and give us some time at 2 am every day, like that schedule library. It will automatically retrieve the metadata. It's very simple. Nothing is. Just read that. Anyway, you guys are not able to do that in the administrator work. Because if you are an administrator, cyber administrator, you are not responsible for that. And there is some auditing will be there. They are the responsible to take care of these things. In the Cyber Act itself, there are some departments, monitoring team, IG, and administration, purely administration team, and some install and dev team, Cyber Act development team. Those guys will work on the implementation of all the applications to integrate direct integration with applications. And we create some connectors. They will create some plugins. They are doing and they are the responsible to take care of giving complete architecture of the Cyber Act. If you joined as an L1 and L2, you are mostly will do the complete administration, how to onboard the account, how to configure the settings of the policy, and how to give the permissions at safe level and how to add members at safe level, and how to generate the reports and what and all the reports which we need to generate and to whom we have to send that, and on daily basis you may get some tickets. Those are relevant to the CPM issues. CPM failure issue, parcel changes, or account lock, some other issues. You need to work that. That's it. That is our work. LL2 would. LL3 will take care about all the implementation of integrations, applications integrations. Sometimes there is no direct integration. That time we need to create some plugins and we need to create some connectors. We have to develop and we need to. For that, we need to reach out to the support team. Then only one support team will give the response. Based on that, we need to take that decision. Or we need to develop some script. And that script we need to integrate with the Cyber Act, where we need to integrate in the data. There are some dependents under the platform. Dependence use cases. In that INI files is there. In that INI files, we need to execute the script. And we have to update that. That CPM will connect to the script, automatically update the passwords in the applications level at the same time, word level. Like that, it will work. The complete system understand. That is the way we need to work for each and every organization. Disaster recovery. I think everyone is aware what is the purpose we are using for the disaster recovery. Whenever something happens to the primary world, it will help us as a backup. It will not get any impact for the business. We are going to discuss here DR architecture and set up DR word failover and component failover. Return to the premise. There are the two main cases for the DR recovery. One is the failover and fail backup. Failover. If something happens to the organization, it will automatically connect to the DR for the backup purpose. And fail backup cases when it is the first primary vault. Take an example of vault. If it is a normal state, that means it is completely recovered. We need to get back from DR vault to the primary vault. That is the failback cases. It should be composed as a normal one. Failover automatically will always connect to the DR. And fail backup case, we will follow for the manual process. And this question will get all the interviews. What is the difference between failover and fail backup case? And what is the steps we are following for the disaster recovery? If something happens, how you do the manually, how you can set up automatically. If you want to bring back how, you have to follow that. What are the steps which we are following here? That I am going to discuss here the majorly. Architecture. It's very simple. In this cyber architecture for the disaster recovery, we will set up the PSM and PA to the DR also. Basically, we are setting up these components to the vault. At the same time, these two components also set up in the DR vaults. Why reason? Because see, the disaster recovery vault is a standalone or cluster. Anything, it will follow. But PSM and PVA should be deployed at the DR site to provide access to all the users in the inventory of the disaster. If something happens, all the users can able to access it, right? That is the reason we need to set up for the PVA and PSM. Why PSM also is required to store the session recordings, to maintain the session recordings. Monitoring that. CPM should not never configure for the automatic failover because CPM will follow this split brain method. And we are allocating the different way. We will not set up for the DR. On the DR user is created automatically. A DR user is a key role for the DR user also, same which we need to enable this. I will show you that. For the DR user also, we need to enable before doing the installation. The same way backup user, same way here. You can see update, enable and authenticate password. The same password which we need to update in the while doing the installation. DR user credential. Here now we have updated. Now what will happen? One user already created in that vault, DR user. While doing the installation, DR service will be installed. But the DR service, what will happen? With the help of the DR user credentials, it will replicate data from the vault. Its DR service is installed on the DR vault. On the DR service, on the DR vault authenticates to the primary vault using the credentials of DR user. It will replicate the data from the primary vault to the DR. Tell me because, see, these are the how it will authenticate. How you can get the data from primary vault to the DR vault. That is important. See, very simple. By seeing this diagram, DR user is a dig vault user. We have credentials for the DR user. A DR service is the one of the service for the DR vault. We want to know how DR vault get the data from the primary vault. If you want to get the data, we need to authenticate to the primary vault. How we can authenticate to the primary vault? By using the DR user credentials, we can authenticate, and then once we authenticate to the primary vault, then we can replicate the data from the primary vault to the DR. That is the procedure which is following now. And the DR service and users. DR service runs on the DR vault always. And there is one service, DR star recovery service. It should be running always. If it is not running, then I will explain you later. Well, in the below slides it will come. For the manual process, how to fail backup cases. That time we need to stop and we need to get it into the back. The DR service and user. The DR service runs on the DR vault. The DR user authenticates to the primary vault from the DR vault as a user with permissions. UDF. The DR user is having these permissions. Yes, that is correct. Have you seen? These are the permissions for the DR users. Here you can see it. Back up all the shifts and reach all the shifts. These are the permissions which we are having. Built-in DR user has these permissions by default. Because DR user is responsible to take care of backup, right, to replicate something. If something happened in the primary vault, it will automatically connect as a DR user. That it will not get any impact in the business. And I answered that the DR replications in the earlier version and the 9.3 version. The DR replication was the process was enhanced to ensure the pass through replication and improve the consistency between production and DR side. Now in the new replication mechanism, metadata we use to call metadata, which includes the current passwords. It is pushed from the primary vault to the DR side as it is created. Immediately it will be stored and has the rear application database synchronization and near real time. Whatever the data, we are having always synchronizing based on the configuration which we are setting up in the Pedrini file. I want to highlight one configuration file here. Always remember home and others. Once we install this DR, there will be one configuration file, that is Pedrini file. This is the configuration file for the DR. Here, we need to change some configurations. For example, enable data on metadata synchronizations. What need to give enable the DB synchronization should be yes. We have to update. Then only the metadata synchronization will be happen. Otherwise, it will not happen. We need to configure all these intervals here. See here, enable check yes and replicate. Do you want to replicate the data? We need to keep this. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@upptalk.com.